Aha, there we go. Slight delay from what we see, Amber, so everything's cool. So everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to kick off bright and early because I know we're going to have some WFM people in the house, and you know how we are with compliance and schedule adherence, so we want to be sure about that. And I spy with my little eye one of our very good friends, Cheryl, in the audience, and we're very glad to have her here. And I think that this is going to be a really good topic for a lot of you. I was at a very excellent conference in New Brunswick in St. John with Contact NB, which is one of the best conferences that I've been to in a long time. And it's one of those things where, it's ironic because we all talk about, we all have to deal with work from home, remote work from anywhere. And then we get to a conference for contact center folks, for workforce management folks, and we remember how great it is to see each other in person, right? How fantastic it is to see people and network and exchange ideas, and you get the enthusiasm, the warmth, the engagement from those folks, and you see some really amazing people and meet some amazing people you might not have otherwise. And I'm happy to have one of those amazing, interesting people here with me today. Amber is, I will let her introduce herself, but I was very struck by her presentation, which we're about to see right now, and wanted to bring it to some of our audience as well, because to me, I was describing it to people as a win-win. But it's really a win-win-win, because this is something that helps customers, it helps employees, it helps a contact center and the employer, because we are talking about finding people who want to learn a new, good, marketable skill, giving them that customer service skill and teaching them about the kind of world they're going to enter and how to give good service and how to work and be successful, specifically in a contact center environment, and knowing what they expect. And a contact center who, as we all know, as all of us are having to deal with a continuous, unending hunger for reliable, skilled, top-notch employees that are going to give good service to our customers. And this is something that trickles all the way down from the contact center through the agents to the customer, as far as being successful, knowing how to do a good job, being aware of the kind of environment you're going into, and being able to hit the ground running on day one. And I think it's amazing, and I think that you will too. So without any further ado, we're going to address technical, we're going to address success, we're going to address happiness and engagement at work. And I'm going to let Amber introduce herself and take it away, because this is something you don't want to miss. And it's something that you are going to think, how do I replicate this in my local community? So Amber, thanks so much for being here today, and let the people know who you are and tell us something about NBCC.
For sure. Thank you so much, Sean, for having me today and getting the chance to speak to everyone. My name is Amber Arsenault. I am one of the instructors at the New Brunswick Community College for the Client Service and Sales Program. It is currently offered in our campus in Moncton, and in September, we're opening it up to our students in St. John. If you don't know where New Brunswick is, it borders Maine. So we are on the northeast of North America. I'll start with a bit of history about the Client Service and Sales Program and how it came to fruition. So as Sean has mentioned, a few years back, members of the contact center community and industry here in New Brunswick approached the community colleges and challenged them with building a program to educate future employees so that they would be more equipped with transferable skills that would add value to their organizations. The college partnered with the contact center industry, and they worked closely together to determine what competencies the contact centers wanted to see in prospective employees. After a couple of years of collaboration, the Client Service and Sales Program was born. So our program really appears to those seeking a career in client service industries. It's a focus on contact centers specifically, and students learn cornerstone skills of customer service, communication, sales techniques, and to build relationships with clients. Throughout this program, students acquire the interpersonal and best practices to build and perform excellence and increase productivity. This program enables students to confidently interact with a team and identify one's immediate and long-term impact as a business asset within various sectors. So that could be finance, insurance, telecommunications, hospitality, government work. The list goes on. Most sectors need a customer service component. Students are also introduced to supervisory skills and management principles to better prepare them for leadership opportunities. Emphasis is placed on developing and enhancing the required verbal and written communication skills to confidently engage clients, interact with internal and external stakeholders, and provide quality customer service. To sum it up, my job is to provide and produce graduates who have strong customer-focused skill sets so that when they are hired for a customer service or sales role, the organization that hires them can then focus on really their industry-specific training rather than the customer service or customer-focused skills. Our first cohort graduated in December of 2022, and I'm currently working with the second cohort. Our third cohort will be the one starting in St. John in September of 2023. So today, I'm going to share my journey as an instructor, and it's been short, but I've learned a lot. So I've only been at this for just under 2 years. I want to tell you about the program so far, who our students are, and most importantly, the lessons that I've learned about supporting our students and building relationships with them. As you will soon learn, we have a very diverse group of students, which is reflective of what I think most workforces look like today. And my hope is that what I go over with you today will help you to support and build strong relationships in your own organizations with your employees. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. I'll start by just telling you a little bit about how I got here. So I started off my career in 2001 as a shipping clerk for a corrugate plant. So they make boxes. And I really quickly developed a love for problem solving, logistics, and working with customers, both internal and external. I met my husband there. So as some of you may sympathize with, it was really adorable to work together at first, and then eventually it becomes less adorable. So in 2007, I decided to make a change, and I went out looking for a role that would kind of continue to build my skill set, but also play to my recent love of logistics and customer service. So I started with the ExxonMobil Business Support Center here in Canada in 2008. And as many people's career paths, I started in the front lines. So I was dispatching fuel and lubricants throughout the US, and then eventually moved my way up to the customer service manager serving Latin America. And that would have been my last assignment that I took in 2020. So then 2021 happens, and there's a whole bunch going on. I'm going through an existential crisis because of the pandemic. I think we all were. My organization had made the decision to go through an organizational restructure. So I wasn't sure what the future was going to look like there. So that was the first time in my career at ExxonMobil that I had some uncertainty if our paths were going to continue to flow in parallel. I was seeing when I was interviewing for some of the roles in my contact center at the time that the talent pool in our local area was becoming quite shallow. Combined with, I had developed a strong love for mentoring. I was going through empty nest syndrome at home, and ways of working were changing constantly in contact centers. All these things converged to a job ad that was placed by NBCC, or the New Brunswick Community College, to be the instructor of their very first client service and sales program. And all of those things led to my decision to apply for that role. And I was lucky enough to be awarded that role. So I started with a vision, as I think most project managers do, of, what does it look like at the end of my first year of teaching? And for me, that meant that I was going to have very happy, successful and well-skilled graduates that I was going to send out to all the contact centers, and they would be so happy with the results. And my students would go on to have very fruitful and long careers in the contact center industry. I had some things that, the school was supporting me with, and things that I had in my own mind about how would I achieve my mission? What were the vision? What were the steps I could take? So lucky, as I had mentioned, for me, the contact center industry and the college had done extensive work figuring out what the competencies should be. So I had that, I was armed with that information. So the contact center said, if I had a perfect employee show up for their interview, these are the skills I would want them to have. So I had that. I knew I had to foster a safe environment where everyone's opinions would be heard and that we'd have very good discussions, that I would set stretch targets for students, that I didn't want them to be comfortable all the time. I wanted to push the envelope a little bit so that I could stretch their skill sets. I would engage in conversations with them. I would have guest speakers from the industry. And in New Brunswick, we are very lucky that the contact center industry is so involved in my program. I have contact centers almost weekly, especially my first semester, coming in and talking to my students about what it looks like to work in a contact center. What are the opportunities? We have people that tell us about 30-year careers starting from a front line all the way up to management and beyond. I would focus on building relationships, and then I would model professional behaviors for them so they would see what the expectation would be when they went out to the workforce. Then day one happened. And on day one, I was faced with a very diverse group of students. So in my first year, I had 26 students from 16 countries. And this year, I have 33 students from 12 countries. And never mind their cultural diversity, I had single moms. I had young people who had just left home for the first time. I had people that had master's degrees. I had people who were very well established. One had already run a contact center on her own. So quite an intimidating situation to walk into. So then I had to look at my vision and say, is it still achievable? And the answer was absolutely it was. However, there were some obstacles that I personally was going to have to overcome in order to make this the smashing success that I wanted it to be. So the first one that I'll talk about is the name. So as I said, 26 students the first year, 33 the second, most with names that I'm unfamiliar with. So it is up to me to make sure that I know someone's name and that I address them properly. So in this case, this is Sukman Preet. I later learned that she likes to go by Sukman, but the point of showing you that name is really because we are all going to be faced with names that may be unfamiliar to us, and that's fine. The purpose is to get it right. Everyone deserves to be called by their name. It's the smallest thing you can do to show respect for in my case, a student, or in your case, a prospective employee. I will tell you personally, I worked with a gentleman for 14 years that called me Amanda. And I will tell you, by year 14, my patience had worn a little thin because I felt, oh, he doesn't even respect me enough or see me for myself enough to call me by my given name or the name I prefer to be addressed by. So with my students, I always start out by saying, okay, you just have to learn Amber. That's the one name you have to learn, but I have to learn 26 or 33, depending on the year. So I always ask them for patience. I always go in and say, I will get this right. I just need a little time to wrap my head around a 33 or 26 names. Understand that there are cultural differences regarding correction. So I may get up in front of a class and say, listen, I'm going to try my best to get your names right as soon as possible. However, if I don't, please correct me. There will be some people from some cultures that may have an authoritarian culture that won't feel comfortable to correct me. So I also rely on my coworkers and other students in the class to help me out when I'm getting it wrong. The best tool for me to get somebody's name right is to spell it out phonetically. So if I can pronounce it and see it in a way that makes good, easy sense to me, then I usually get that right more time than not. And then in this day and age, there's really no excuse for getting it wrong when we have translator apps and websites where I can type somebody's name in and hear it, so that I can tune my ear to getting that name right. Another thing that I wanted to mention around the names, I always say this when I give the talk, is we can all think of somebody that we've worked with, lived with, or been around who, if they saw the name Sukhmanpreet, they might think it is okay to say something like, oh, well, we're just going to call you Sam. I'm never going to learn that. Let's just call you Joe. That is not an acceptable practice. And it was never acceptable in the first place, but it was something that I know I've heard in different meetings in my past. So we want to make sure that we are addressing people the way they want to be addressed. For language, most of my students, English is their second language. So there's some things that it took me back because, I made assumptions that, if everybody's been taught the same way, or everybody comes from the same type of business world, so that we all know all the same lingo. And I quickly found out that's not the case. So I know every contact center I've had the privilege of either working for or being with or spending time with has acronyms. I don't know one that doesn't. So if that is the case for you, having a library that you talk to your new employee about to direct them, so that if they are in a meeting and someone is throwing out acronyms, they have a place to go back and reference. Sometimes it can be painfully embarrassing for, again, depending culturally where they come from, to ask in a meeting, hey, what did you mean by that? Where that's common practice in North America, where we might stop somebody and interrupt them and say, hey, can you clarify what that acronym is? That may not be the case. So having that library that is set up and up to date for them to refer to is paramount to their understanding of your business. Technical jargon, that's another issue that comes up when we're talking about the different sectors. So whether you're in the hospitality sector, telecommunications sector, or insurance, technical jargon may not translate from country to country. So even if you hire an employee that's not from your country, but has worked in the same industry, you can't assume that the technical jargon was the same. So again, open communication around technical jargon and making sure that if you don't understand what your employee is saying, that you have an open and honest discussion about that, and vice versa. In New Brunswick, my part of the world is notorious for slang and colloquialisms. We love a good saying and we love a good slang word. But what I've realized is I've had students say, what do you mean by that? So I'll give you a very benign example of killing two birds with one stone. That's not a universal colloquialism. So sometimes they'll look at me, kind of their head will be cocked and they'll be like, what, why would you do that? Why would you kill two birds? So, clarifying those. And then again, English language is full of double meanings. We have there, and there, and here, and here, and here. And so that can be confusing for someone that's learning English for the first time. So again, when it comes to language, it's really about keeping the door open for communication and being willing to accept questions that you might not be used to getting. Because usually if you're working with people that are from the same area as you, you all kind of speak the same way and you don't have to clarify, but just taking note of who's in the room, and maybe there's some things that need to be clarified in order to gain understanding from everyone. The next couple of slides are the heaviest in this presentation, and they're on biases. And I had to get really honest with myself about my conscious and unconscious biases. So I'll start with unconscious biases. So these are the things that we have a preference for, or we don't like as much, but we wouldn't say that out loud. We're not even really aware that we have an affinity for a certain person or a certain thing. And I'm going to give you an example of this just to clarify. So I want you to put yourself in the place that you're holding a job interview, and maybe you instantly have a connection with a potential employee because they look like you. they're of the same gender, they're of the same age, they're of the same race, for example. I see this a lot in interviews, especially when we're talking like generation gaps. People start to build a rapport with one another because maybe they're from the same generation and they have things in common. And do you remember when this happened? And they're not looking at the person as an individual. They're really looking at it as an experiential experience as a whole. The example I like to use the very most of an unconscious bias, because I think it's more common than any of us would like to admit, is if you call to get customer service from someone and someone answers the phone and they have a particular accent, is there an accent that makes you unconsciously roll your eyes or have a thought that this exchange is going to go horrifically? And then you're just pleasantly surprised when the person knows what they're doing and they help you. So if that is the case, and I know when I say this to my students, most of them are nodding. So I know that this is a more common reaction. And again, it's not something, you're not outwardly having a disdain for a certain accent. However, based on your previous experiences, this has informed you to actually have a visceral reaction to hearing that accent again. So the point of the discussion on unconscious biases is really to start treating the person in front of you as an individual, not being informed by a positive or negative experience that you may have had in the past. So on a positive side of this, of an unconscious bias, I'll give you an example. I met a gentleman recently who owns a company, and he had hired, I think, 6 or 7 people from the Philippines. And he was saying to me, oh my gosh, my workers from the Philippines, they're just amazing. If I could get 10 more, I'd be happy. Well, he's not thinking of any of them as an individual. I could send him 10 more people from the Philippines, but they may not be as good of worker. They may not work the same. They may have different experiences, but he's lumping them all in. And he thinks he's being very generous, right? But he's not being generous. He's actually generalizing a whole country's worth of people. So that's what we call the halo or the horns effect, things you have affinities for and things that you don't. And so another general example of something you don't have an affinity for, maybe you've got somebody in front of you and you're interviewing them and they went to a rival school. And for some reason, you are just programmed to hate everything that comes from that rival school. So you don't even give that person a chance. That's the horns effect. So something that doesn't resonate with you, you have a bias against. So just wanted to bring the biases to light. And again, this is something that you really have to soul search for, because we don't see them. We don't see them happen, but we all have affinities towards certain things. And that's based on our experiences, how we were raised, who we worked with in the past, all of these things. Then we have conscious biases. So typically a conscious bias, we'd talk about in the terms of prejudice or racism. But for the purposes of hiring, we have laws that protect our potential employees from this. But I had some conscious biases that I was like loud and proud about. I was not embarrassed by these conscious biases at all. But through teaching my students, I've had to reframe how I think about these biases. So I would have told you very bluntly 2 years ago that if I saw somebody sleeping in my classroom, that they were lazy. Or if they were late, it meant they were irresponsible or unreliable. They asked for extensions, it meant they were unprepared. If they were requesting shift change, they were annoying. If they were crying at work or school, that meant they were unprofessional. And these are things I'm sure I've even had conversations with other managers about. And, we all agreed vehemently on these things. But as I've met my students, on day one in orientation, I had someone sleeping in my class. And then speaking to them after, I found out that the night before, they had been on a 16-hour journey to get from their country to Canada and still decided to get up in the morning and come to my class because they thought it was so important to meet me and be there for orientation. So that's somebody I would want to hire. And the result was they were fighting really hard to keep it together that day to try to stay awake. Late. So I have people that are late with assignments or they ask me for an extension. It doesn't mean they're unprepared. It means that life happens. And so maybe they got scheduled for a shift that they were not expecting, or one of their children got sick. I'm teaching adult learners. So everything that happens to each of us on the day-to-day also happens to my students. And I've had arguments before with people outside of the college saying, well, in the real world, they can't be late and they can't ask for an extension. But that's not my impression of the real world. When I left the contact center industry, we were very flexible. Work-life balance became a word that was very common in our day-to-day. So while, you don't want to make that a ritualistic thing where you're always late and you're always asking for extension, there is room for flexibility and there is room for exceptions. So I've really had to look at my students and look at how I see them through a different lens, because I have people that would be phenomenal employees under really, really, really tough circumstances right now. You think they arrive in Canada, they don't have housing, they don't have a car, they're relying on public transit sometimes. So yeah, things tend to happen, but it's my job to be there to support them and to help them through their educational journey while balancing many other circumstances in their personal lives. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something that I teach in class, and I wanted to share it with you as well, because this is the most emotional, or has been the most emotional subject matter that I have covered with my students. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that there are levels of needs that each person goes through, and that we can't move to the next level until the previous level has been met. So when we get to physiological needs, air, food, water, shelter, these are the basics. And what Maslow says is if we don't have food, water, shelter, we can't even worry. We don't even have the capacity to worry about our safety. And then if we get our physiological needs met, we can worry about safety. And once that's met, then we can worry about our friendships, intimacy, family. And then we move to our self-respect, self-esteem, and then finally self-actualization. The reason this is a tough subject in my course is because 100% of my students had grown at least, or had achieved some of these levels in the pyramid. And a lot of them had a full pyramid when they were in their previous country. Then they come to Canada and they are right back down to physiological needs. And this is gut-wrenching. So when they started to share their stories with me of, like, I had a house, I had a car, I had a job, I had all these things, I had family around me. And then to say, now I'm back to making sure I can find affordable food and housing. That's a huge change. And I always challenge people when we're talking about empathy to think about your life as it is today and think about what happens to you if you have to go back to worrying about food and shelter, and what support you would like to have, or what you would want for your kid if it was your child to have in order to start building that pyramid back up. And so that is really the foundation of why I wanted to talk about this subject matter, because I think sometimes we forget that, these are very capable people who had very full lives, and that we can be a person that helps them on their journey, or we can be someone that gets in their way and is a barrier. So what can we do? So support is the biggest thing that we can do. And I have some examples of that from a office perspective and from a school perspective. So most students coming from a different country are experiencing culture shock. In Canada, a lot of it has to do with the weather. We have very, very cold winters, and a lot of my students come from very, very nice and warm tropical places. So that's a big culture shock. But when we're talking about the business world, One of the ones that I see is in North America, a lot of companies have a low or no scent policy. And we don't talk about that. We assume that people know this. However, North America is kind of unique in this. If you go to Europe or you go to Asia Pac, we still see, or we're almost encouraged to wear perfumes and aftershaves and all of those wonderful things. So to not know that, I've been communicated to by my students, like, you feel like an outcast because you had no idea, and then people are angry with you because you're wearing perfume, but you didn't know that that was a thing. And one story that I'll share with you is I had a group of 7 girls that went to they got hired by the same company, and they wore their perfumes into the office. And then the next day they came in and there was just posters plastered everywhere, low scent, no scent. And then they come back to me and they say, I'm pretty sure that was for us. And I'm like, yeah, it was, but why didn't anybody have a conversation with them? It's really a passive aggressive way of dealing with something rather than just having a human conversation with somebody. Another thing specific to the contact center industry and culture shock is contact centers are not created equal across the globe. So in North America, we see a potential from a entry-level position and making it a lifelong career. That doesn't translate to every contact center. So I have students who've worked in contact centers before in another country, and they weren't subjected to great training, I&D, support, promotions, career development, none of that. So I have to really retrain them on what it's like to work in a contact center here and what the expectations are of working in one here. Another thing that we have that I try to support with is transportation. Obviously, I'm not running around picking up my students, but giving them the information about Moncton, New Brunswick is not a huge metropolis. So our buses come once an hour. So if you miss that bus, you're missing probably an hour of class or an hour of work. So making sure they know that there's an app available so they can track the buses. They can see if something's late. Helping them understand where to go to, because a lot of the time they have to be relicensed if they want to be a driver in Canada. So understanding where they can go to seek help. Homesickness and loneliness. Often I've seen that manifest itself not only from a mental health standpoint, but a physical health standpoint as well. So having a team at the college that surrounds them, supports them, has counseling services, tells students where to go if they're not feeling well, and being able to support them from that standpoint. Housing and hunger. So knowing where the food banks are is something that I've had to learn, and learning where to look for housing. And then one of the biggest sources of stress for my students, especially, is permanent residency. So the uncertainty of, hey, if I get this job, or if I take this course from Amber, will that help me to get permanent residency in Canada, or in a lot of your cases in the United States? So that's something that we have an international team here at the college that helps them look for all the tracks in order to gain permanent residency in Canada. Providing support and room to grow. So these are I've mentioned some of these things already, but I'll go over them really quickly. So having, for us at the school, having student services, or for in a business, having counseling services, having an international support team on the HR team. So somebody in human resources that is well-versed in supporting new international employees, or in our case, students, that can help guide them. Because I know for me as an instructor, I am not an expert in immigration law. So I need someone that I can refer my students to. EAP programs, I think most companies at this point have an EAP program, but making sure that the employee knows exactly where to go. Having insurance and benefits. Having access to local resources. So maybe having in your welcome guide or your orientation kit some of the local resources or multicultural associations that exist in your communities. And then flexibility and empathy. Thinking about what can you do. I know a lot of times In my experience in a contact center, we relied heavily, or we pushed back using our policies. But instead of thinking about how do I live within this policy, think about how can I be flexible within the policy. So for example, I had international employees that in Canada, French is our second language. So it's beneficial to anyone to learn our second language, which is French. So I had employees that wanted to go take French classes, and those French classes were between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. Well, going over, some of the different options, I could look at how many calls we got between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. And that wasn't our busiest time of the day because we were supporting another time zone. So maybe I could flex their schedule, allow them to take off from 1 to 2 in the afternoon, and then they would work an extra hour in the evening when I was busier. So when Sean talks about win-win, that was great for me. I had better coverage when I was busier, and it was a win for the employee because they got to go learn French in the middle of the day. And then finally, setting clear expectations. Most of the miscommunications that I've had with my students come from me not setting clear expectations, or wording them in a different way, or making sure that the student really understood what was expected of me. And when there are a little bit of a language barrier, or we're coming from 2 different industries, it's important to not make any assumptions that the person that's hearing your message is receiving it as you intended. So again, it's not about making anyone feel like they don't understand, but just asking those clarifying questions when you've given someone an assignment so that they know what is expected. And then going back with them and reiterating and saying, how are you doing? And when you start to get answers like that, maybe sounding, oh, maybe they don't exactly get what I need, or they don't know exactly the timeline, that gives you a chance to go over again. Community is paramount when it comes to making someone feel welcomed, making someone feel safe in a new environment. So in the classroom, I provide lots of opportunity, usually like 15 minutes in the morning, to socialize. I give that time intentionally so that people get to know one another. In my classroom, like I said, I have students from multiple countries, but they really are each other's support. And through this socialization time, we start to see a bit of a family environment start to develop, and they can start relying on one another. And we start to hear things like, so-and-so's babysitting another person's kid for the weekend. And we start to see a community develop. I also have to do intentional group work. One of the reasons is because it's a competency. So I have to teach what it's like to work in a diverse group that mirrors what's going to happen when they go out in the workforce. So what I typically do is I put 5 or 6 people, and I make sure that they're 5 or 6 people that are not from the same country, and I have them work together. And this gives them a sense to broaden their social network, and also get a sense of what it's like to work cross-culturally, because that's what will happen in a contact center. They will work with multiple people from around the world, and they have to learn about how that is, how to make sure that you can work effectively, even if you're coming from different points of view. What we're getting from this is also better ideas. So I think this is something we see in business, is that innovative ideas don't typically come from a bunch of people that grew up in the same town, that look the same, that have done the same things, and have had the same experiences. So group work, when we work in diverse teams, we get the best ideas. We get the most innovative ideas. So this is a great exercise for them. And I mean, we oftentimes think about prejudices, North America versus the rest of the world. But the truth is, what I see when I'm working in group work is that there's prejudices all over the place. There's assumptions and stereotypes that my students make amongst each other. So that kind of flushes those out and allows us to really talk about them. Holding events. So I hold events like potlucks, where somebody can bring a dish from their country. They're the best potlucks in the world because they bring me something that I've never usually even heard of, or if I have heard of it, I've never had their mother's recipe, which is usually better. We have open discussions. I attend inclusion and diversity training programs, and continue to foster a safe environment where we can have open discussions with respect. We can ask tough questions as long as it's done with respect and a sense of care for one another. That's how we learn about one another. We can't shy away from those discussions. In the office, one of the suggestions that I have, and it was something that I had tried in the past that worked for me, was let's say you're hiring somebody that speaks Spanish and you have someone else in your offices that speaks Spanish, maybe see if they would like to be their orientation buddy. This would give the person that's coming in a relief. They don't have to speak their second language all day, every day. They can switch to their first language. They have that first bit of sense of community by meeting someone that might speak the same language as them. Having social committees, so intentional time set aside by the organization to have your employees socialize with one another. Recognizing holidays. So I've made some mistakes on recognizing holidays, and one of them was I had brought in breakfast for everyone as a reward for a big project that they had done. But I didn't check my calendar, and I didn't realize that a couple of my students would have been observing Ramadan during that time. So they wouldn't be able to participate. So what I could have done was restructured or changed the time of that potluck to make sure that it wasn't following in a time where some of my students were fasting. Ask for feedback, be open to feedback, ask your employees what we're doing right, what we can be doing better. Having I&D training and programs. Now, I think, again, a lot of companies have these. A lot of organizations have I&D training and programs, but it's all about walking the talk. So do you just have the program to be able to check off a box, or are you actively trying to promote inclusion and diversity in your network? So that's a question that all of us kind of have to wrestle with, and then evaluate the company culture. So are we doing what we say we're doing? And do we need to be doing more? And again, that comes a lot from your feedback from your employees. And then celebrating one another, celebrate our differences. One of the contact centers here in New Brunswick, one of the things they do is if they have a new employee coming in and they're from a country that they have no employees currently from, they'll hang their flag of their country in their office or in their atrium. So the first thing that everybody sees when they walk in the morning is this sea of flags from representing each of their employees. So, and I know for me, when I saw this, I was like, it's a really cute idea and I like it. And then I got thinking about some of the times that I've been traveling around the world and how peaceful it made me to see the Canadian flag. If I was going by an embassy, it was just a beacon of home. And it's, again, a small thing that we can do to celebrate our employees and make them feel cared for. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from Barack Obama. The study of geography is more than memorizing places on a map. It's about understanding the complexity of our world, appreciating the diversity of cultures that exist across continents. And in the end, it's about using all that knowledge to help bridge divides and bring people together. So that's my little story about my first 2 years. I think, Sean, if you brought me back 2 more years from now, it would be 20 more slides, because I think I'm constantly learning. But every time I learn something from my students, and I think I learn more from them sometimes, I want to get that out there and share, because I know if I'm struggling with it, these organizations, our contact centers, are also struggling to maneuver this very global world that we're in now.
That's for sure. That's excellent, Amber, and so many good actionable items in there. Everyone, please feel free to drop some questions or comments in the chat. There's a slight delay from where Amber and I are broadcasting to what you see, so give me just a second if you put something in the chat for me to see it and respond to it. I have a couple of questions, though. Amber, if you could you talk and give us a little bit of little specifics around the certificate that your students get and what the program is called? Because when I was looking for programs similar to yours in my neck of the woods, I had a lot more luck searching on the acronym of the certificate and the exact name of the program.
Right. So the exact name of the program is Client Service and Sales. So I and like I said, I don't know. I don't know what you found when you were searching, Sean. Did you find quite a bit of programs in the US when you were looking?
I did actually. And I'm not going to say that all of them are specifically lined up with a contact center, but this is the kind of customer service sales training that they're giving people that is a foundation that even if they're not being told this is what AHT means, I still think this is something that is extremely valuable for a lot of contact centers. But you go ahead.
Yeah. So, and what I wanted to stress on this, Sean, I think we talked about it yesterday, was, this isn't a unique situation that the contact centers in New Brunswick and NBCC found themselves in. This is something that could be replicated. So if you have, a lot of contact centers or a few contact centers in your area, and you also have a college, it might be worth reaching out to see if you could design a specific program. Because in my class, like we're definitely teaching things like communication skills, how to handle an irate customer, how to, we do a whole series on personality and behavioral types, where they identify their own, but they also identify those of a customer, and how to maneuver different behavioral types. So, we're talking about the day-to-day. Also, they do simulations where I throw a terrible customer at them and they have to figure it out. So that the first time that they go on a phone isn't at your organization. They've done it with me. This is something they've seen before. They can manage it. It really is all about giving them the confidence when they walk into an organization, like, hey, I can handle the customers. You teach me your business, you teach me your systems, but I've got your customers. I'm not worried about doing that. The other thing that we teach is we teach professional sales skills. So they do like a Shark Tank presentation for me. They do an elevator pitch for me. It's a really fun course. I hope I'm selling it as fun. And then they also do a workplace integration, where I'm struggling with this. I won't pull the wool over your eyes here. But when this course was designed, it was pre-COVID. So there were tons of contact centers open, and we were going to send our students there for about 8 days just to get a feel for what it looks like. However, now we're all at home. Yeah. So I don't know that, I don't know how that one course is going to evolve, because I can't be sending students to people's homes. But we will definitely be adjusting as time goes on that one. But yeah, there's multiple layers. They take interpersonal skills. They take how to look for a job, they take management and supervisory courses. And some of them will often say, why do I have to take this management and supervisory course? I don't want to be. I just want to be a frontline worker. And I'll say, because you're going to have a supervisor or a manager. So you need to understand where they're coming from. How to do a professional development document. So all of those things get covered, so that when they go out into the world, they're not surprised by much. They would only be, needing to learn what your specific industry is doing.
Exactly. I think, though, there is some of the industry jargon, the kind of, here's what people are looking for, here's specifically the kinds of measurements that you're going to be measured by, and your performance will be reviewed by, that kind of thing. They get some of that too, right? They
do. So we talk about KPIs quite a bit. I talk about KPIs in a very general term, because they're different for every contact center. So we teach them, the most common ones. But I worked in a contact center that didn't have any call KPIs. So ours was all about, if we were working in an AR, days to pay, or how much somebody was off on their credit limit, all of those things. But we do talk about call time and hold time and all of those things as well, because I think a lot of contact centers are still using those measurements. And then we talk about, career development. What do you need to do? And how can you be a critical thinker? How can you add value to an organization above and beyond your job role? So can you look for opportunities to improve your organization or the processes within your own department?
One of the questions that I was told to ask um, by more than one person, actually, that I told that we were going to do this. Do you have any kind of measurements or anecdotal feedback from any of the contact centers where you've placed students successfully about their longevity there, or their attrition rate, or how they compare to just a regular training class as far as washing out in the middle of training?
So I have, so the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the community college keeps tabs on the students well after they graduate. So we want to know, A, how many are employed, and B, how many are employed in the field in which they studied. So my graduating class actually just received their certificates in June. So I don't have that data yet because they've just gone out. But however, I do have some anecdotal information, which is I had 8 students last year. So that my very first graduating class that went to one contact center. So 8 of them at one contact center. And the feedback that I got from that contact center was it was the best training class they've ever had in their history. And this is a company that's over 100 years old. So then I have another one, the one that I was a little nervous about. She went out into the insurance industry. So she's taking frontline calls for the insurance industry. This particular company uses 10 different systems. So rather than having one centralized CRM, they're a little antiquated. So they have 10. And I thought, there's English as a second language. I've taught the basics, but this is more than what I've taught. And she signed up for a 3-month term position with a class of 20 or more, and she was the only one hired on permanently.
Wow. Okay, cool. And if you give me the name of that place with 10 systems, I've got a tool that can help them with that.
I'll do that offline.
Cool. Sure. So I think that what we're getting here from the feel that I get from this, and the reason that I wanted to have you on to spread this message, is that what you're doing here is giving contact centers a really viable new way to say, here is a way, because where it's like, where's the next generation of employees going to come from? Who's teaching them how to work, how to be at work, how to work in the world and interact? Or some of the folks that have come of age during COVID and have not had that kind of communal, it's like, how do I work with other people in a group? And you see articles about this all the time. And it's like, are the employers going to have to shoulder that? And you're giving these folks, it's like, here's a way that we can address this.
That's right.
But you're also telling the employer, here's how you can support these students and make them successful once they get into your environment. Absolutely. Which is huge, and something that you hear about people recognizing the importance of that today. But it's like, then you say, but yeah, how are we going to do that? And this is some really good, important specifics on how you can, do that. And I think that's amazing, and it's fantastic. Everyone, I think that this is a really fantastic, amazing topic that we've covered here. There will be a recording available on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. Anyone that's got questions about this, please reach out. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, that's fine. Or if you have my contact at Call Design, you can contact me there at smccormick@calldesign.na.com. And I will be happy to, I'm volunteering Amber to say if there's questions that I'll be the point of contact there, and I'll get those to you and we can read those back to folks. But Amber, thank you so much. This is fantastic. Really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for doing this for the industry and for the students in your community. Thanks. Fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. There are lots of other events coming up. Check our LinkedIn page and sign up. We've always got new content coming out. Our good friend Adolfo's got some Spanish language content that's going to be scheduled very soon, so be on the lookout for that. And thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.